Welcome to our exploration of the Brahma Sutra Chapter 4, Phala Adhyaya. The Brahma Sutra, also known as the Vedanta Sutra, is a foundational text of Hindu philosophy that systematically explores the nature of Brahman, the ultimate reality. It consolidates the teachings of the Upanishads into a structured philosophy and serves as a guide for spiritual seekers. The Brahma Sutra, authored by Badarayana Vyasa, is part of Uttara Mimamsa, Vedanta, and presents a logical framework for understanding Brahman. It is written in aphoristic style, requiring extensive commentary. Great scholars like Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, and others have interpreted it through different philosophical perspectives. 4 chapters of the Brahma Sutra are 1. Samanvaya Adhyaya, understanding Para-Brahman, the supreme reality. 2. Aviroda Adhyaya, refuting objections from other philosophical schools. 3. Sadhana Adhyaya, spiritual practices and meditations for realizing Brahman. 4. Phala Adhyaya, liberation and the state of liberated souls. This video summarizes the key teachings of Chapter 4, known as the Phala Adhyaya, the final chapter of the Brahma Sutras. The focus of this chapter is on the fruits or results of realizing Brahman, the ultimate, non-dual reality. In this teaching, we see how meditation, self-inquiry, and scriptural knowledge leads to the fruit of self-realization, and how the liberated soul remains in oneness with Brahman. This chapter is divided into 4 sections, and each section unfolds a part of the Vedantic teaching on the fruit of self-realization, the nature of liberation, and the final outcome for the seeker. Section 1: the fruit of meditation and the identity of the self. The first part of Chapter 4 teaches that through the repeated and sustained practice of meditation, the mind becomes gradually purified. This process is not a one-time event, but a cumulative effect that strips away the layers of ignorance, avidya, that obscure the true nature of the self. As the practitioner continues to meditate, the mind begins to perceive a unity within itself. It no longer sees the body, mind, and senses as separate from the inner self. The very act of persistent contemplation acts like a lens that brings the eternal, unchanging Brahman into clear focus. In this state of meditative repetition, the individual gradually comes to the direct experience of the truth expressed in the Mahavakya, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. This teaching emphasizes that what might initially appear as a distant, abstract principle becomes intimately realized in the heart of the seeker. The repetitive meditative insight helps dissolve the habitual identification with transient phenomena, so that the practitioner starts to experience a deep sense of oneness with the absolute reality. In essence, meditation acts as the catalyst that converts intellectual understanding into lived, direct realization. Another important teaching in this section is the clarification that rituals, symbols, and external forms are only pointers. They are like signposts on the road to the ultimate truth, but not the destination itself. While symbols can direct the mind toward higher knowledge, true realization comes when the mind transcends all such external identifications and perceives the self directly. This idea is encapsulated in the teaching that no self-identity is found with symbols. The true knowledge of the self is not mediated by any external form or ceremonial act, but is an inner, experiential truth. Finally, the section explains that the error of superimposition, the tendency to overlay the ever-changing attributes of the body, mind, and senses onto the eternal self, is gradually undone by sustained meditation. Once the veil of superimposition is lifted, the true nature of the self, or Atman, is revealed as pure, luminous, and identical with Brahman. Thus, the fruit of meditation is the direct, non-dual realization that the individual soul is not separate, but is one with the infinite, unchanging reality. Section 2: the process of liberation at death and beyond. This section of Chapter 4 explains that when one has truly realized Brahman, the subtle bonds that tie the soul to the physical body and its transient emotions are broken. The enlightened soul becomes like a lamp that remains undimmed even when its physical container is discarded. In practical terms, the transformative effect of self-realization is that even before death, the soul no longer clings to the body as its true identity. The individual is thus prepared to undergo the natural process of dissolution with equanimity. At the moment of death, the sutras describe how the subtle elements within the body, such as prana, vital force, and other subtle energies, merge back into the infinite. This merging is not a loss, but a reunion with the Supreme. The liberated soul, having shed its identification with temporary attachments, does not permanently depart from Brahman. Instead, it remains in constant union with the Absolute, even as it passes through various transitional states during the process of death. Furthermore, the process of liberation is presented as an ongoing reality rather than a mere post-mortem occurrence. The journey of the soul after death is depicted as the continuation of the self's intrinsic nature. Whether the soul travels along the path of the gods, Devayana, or that of the ancestors, Pitrayana, the underlying truth remains that the soul, once freed, is never truly separated from Brahman. This teaching encourages a view of liberation as an ever-present potential that becomes manifest as soon as ignorance is dispelled. This teaching reminds the seeker that liberation, moksha, is not simply an escape from the cycle of birth and death. Rather, it is the full realization of one's true nature. In the state of liberation, the soul is no longer subject to the ordinary limitations imposed by the body and mind, and it experiences a state of eternal peace and undiminished clarity. This deep assurance offers practical comfort to the seeker by affirming that death is not an end, but a transition to an already attained state of freedom. Section 3. The outcome of self-realization. In Section 3, the Brahma Sutras teach that self-realization brings about an experience of eternal, unchanging bliss. Once the mistaken identifications with the body, mind, and senses have been transcended through meditation, the liberated soul abides in a state of perfect equilibrium. This state is characterized by an absence of the dualities that normally dominate human experience. There is no fluctuation between pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow. This unchanging bliss is not an ephemeral state, but the very nature of the self, which is identical with Brahman. A central insight here is that when one realizes the true nature of the self, all accumulated karma loses its binding effect. The sutras assert that the fruits of past actions are rendered null because the individual, now merged with the eternal Brahman, no longer operates under the laws of cause and effect as they apply to the limited, material existence. The liberation achieved through self-realization results in a state where there is no residual karma, a state of pure, unaffected awareness. This section also clarifies that the experience of liberation is one of self-effulgence and direct, unmediated knowledge. The soul, having been freed from the cycle of birth and death, exists in a state of absolute self-sufficiency. This liberated state is marked by non-duality. The distinction between the knower and the known vanishes, and one comes to see that there is no difference between the individual soul and Brahman. This realization brings with it a profound sense of inner freedom and completeness. Finally, the outcome of self-realization is not limited to abstract bliss or inner peace. It also has practical implications for how one lives in the world. Even while continuing to function in a physical body, the liberated soul operates with an awareness that is free from the usual attachments and anxieties. This practical transformation enables one to act in the world with a deep sense of detachment and equanimity, knowing that the ultimate reality remains unaltered by external circumstances. Section 4. The ultimate nature of liberation and freedom. Section 4 brings the teaching of Chapter 4 to its culmination by emphasizing the ultimate nature of liberation. The sutras teach that true freedom, moksha, is realized when one directly recognizes that the individual self is not separate from Brahman. In this state, all dualities between subject and object, self and other, dissolve completely. This non-dual awareness is immediate and self-revealing. It does not depend on any external conditions or practices once it is fully actualized. Another key teaching in this section is that liberation is characterized by an experience of the unconditioned, limitless reality of Brahman. The liberated soul is described as abiding in an infinite state, free from the limitations of time, space, or the physical body. Such a soul is no longer bound by the ordinary laws of causation that govern the material world. This teaching assures the seeker that the ultimate truth is complete and permanent, providing a firm foundation for the experience of freedom. Moreover, the process of liberation transforms every aspect of one's life. The realized individual, though still participating in the world, no longer identifies with the transient aspects of existence. Their actions are no longer driven by the fear of loss or the pursuit of temporary pleasures. Instead, they are guided by the deep inner certainty of oneness with Brahman. This transformation is described as a complete reordering of priorities, a life marked by non-attachment, inner peace, and the unwavering recognition of one's true, limitless nature. Finally, the sutras teach that the ultimate result of liberation is not merely a state of inner bliss, but the complete annihilation of all bondage. The enlightened soul, having merged with Brahman, is free from the cycle of birth and death. This state of absolute freedom means that the individual no longer experiences the karmic limitations that once governed their existence. In practical terms, the teachings reassure the seeker that liberation is a present reality and that true freedom is attainable through the disciplined pursuit of knowledge and meditation. This ultimate freedom transforms not only one's inner experience, but also one's entire approach to life, leading to a state of complete and enduring peace. Each section of Chapter 4, as explained above, builds upon the previous ones to present a comprehensive picture of how meditation, self-inquiry, and scriptural knowledge lead to the realization of the self as Brahman. In summary, Chapter 4 of the Brahma Sutras guides the seeker through the final stage of the Vedantic path. It teaches that through disciplined meditation and the removal of ignorance, one can dissolve the mistaken identification with the body, mind, and senses. Realize that one's true self is identical with Brahman, eternal, blissful, and limitless. Experience liberation not as an external reward after death, but as an immediate, ever-present state of freedom. Live a life of balance where worldly actions are no longer the source of bondage, and the inner self shines forth in its pristine glory. This synthesis of the sutras in Chapter 4, or the Phala Adhyaya, ultimately points the aspirant toward the final emancipation, where the individual self is recognized as inseparable from the absolute reality, Brahman. Please like this video, subscribe or follow this channel, and share the timeless wisdom with the world. Om Tat Sat.